I very much would like for you to pray that we have the right word for the right time, and a word for the weary in season is what Jesus prayed for. If he needed that each day, then certainly I do. I came with a list of sermons in my mind, and this one wasn't on the list. I thought I might find some notes stuck in my Bible, though it had been many, many months, maybe a year or two since I'd preached it. I didn't find any notes stuck in there anywhere, and I scrambled and looked back on Facebook to see what kind of help I could find there, perhaps. Grabbed a pen and scrap of paper from a dear sister, scratched out a few notes to try to keep my thoughts sort of in line. I tried to pray a few minutes ago for God to give me what I was supposed to say. I seemed so confused, and this is what I think he put on my mind. I hope it's of him. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 2. Be not forgetful to entertain strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. Is that verse literal? I think it is. I think we have accounts in the scriptures where angels showed up, and people didn't know they were angels, and God and two angels showed up with Abraham, and he entertained them. He had Sarah fix him something to eat. They sat down and ate with him. That's pretty wild, isn't it? Eventually, he figured out who it was. We could go to that passage and show you the sequence of things. But he made his decision to entertain them, to treat them kind and help them in their journey, do what a Christian should do. And he just kind of made that decision, not knowing it was God and two angels, but it was. Be careful to entertain strangers, for some have entertained Jesus unawares. Didn't say that, did it? Has that ever happened? Yeah. He came to John the Baptist, and he didn't know who he was at the beginning. John said, I knew him not. After the resurrection, Mary didn't recognize him. She thought he was the gardener. The two on the road to Emmaus, they had no idea it was Jesus. I think in the Old Testament days, he appeared. I think he appeared to Moses in the burning bush. Moses had no idea. Who do I say you are? Joshua, I think, saw the same Jesus. The reason I say Joshua saw the same Jesus, in Moses' day, the directions given, take your shoes off, you're on holy ground. And when Joshua saw this warrior, he said in so many words, are you with me or against me? Are you on our side or against us? And it was Jesus. He said, I'm the captain of the Lord's host. And he told him to take his shoes off. Angels don't do that. John attempted to worship an angel, and he said, oh, don't bow to me. I'm not God. I think that was Jesus. So he did it when he was here. Of course he did. There were people who knew him not. They figured out who he was eventually, and some didn't figure out they'd ever met with him. And he did it in Old Testament days. Might he do it again? I don't know. Might angels be among us? The scriptures speak of an innumerable host who are apparently in worship services with us. Might some of them at some point appear to be a man or a woman, us maybe not recognize them? I think that's a good potential. Some have entertained angels unawares. Some probably have missed chances to do that, not realizing what an opportunity they had. Well, if you're supposed to entertain angels, just entertain strangers just in case it might be an angel. And then we've thrown in the potentially greater possibility that it just could be Jesus. How would you act if Jesus was in the room? If he came in and sat down tonight? Well, if he came in, I think I'd sit down and let him stand here. You see, it would change our whole way of doing things, and it would change my way of thinking, and I'd think different if he walked in. But what if he's here? What if he has walked in? What if he's sitting among us right now? That changes our thinking, doesn't it? Well, let me ask you a different way. Is he not with us right now? We know he is. He's said, "Lo, I'll be with you always, even to the end of the world." The end of the world hadn't come yet, so I think that promise is still a promise from Jesus. I think he's with me tonight. I think he's right here with us. I think he's in our midst, spiritually speaking now, to make it clear what I'm talking about. But perhaps he could appear in a physical form. My point is that if I'm thinking in such a way as to realize he's right here beside me or in the room with me, that changes my thinking. But if I'm not thinking that way, then my thinking keeps on going on to other things and less important things than thinking about him and what he'd have me to do. Some have entertained angels unawares. What if Jesus is in the room? Now, hold on to that thought and let's change directions a little bit. God has equipped each of you in a spectacular way. He has placed himself within you at born again. And in that wonderful, glorious act, he has given you what the Bible calls the fruit of the Spirit. The effect of him being in there. His character, his traits have become a part of you. At born again, that just happens. It's part of God's system. So you have within you some special things: love, joy, peace, long-suffering, patience, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. He's made you what you weren't. He's given you abilities to act as you at one time could not have acted without him being in there and having that kind of character. Beyond that, he's given each of his children, in some shape, form, or fashion, special gifts beyond ordinary. Beyond what he gives to everybody, he gives some special ones to individuals that he chooses how to do that. In Romans chapter 12, verses 6 through 8. The gift of prophecy. That's not necessarily just telling the future. That's the ability to proclaim things that can't be known in a natural way. That's a broad definition, but I think I can show you that that's the definition of prophecy. To be able to speak things that can't be known naturally. Well, lots of things can't be known naturally that you're able to talk about. And maybe you have a special gift to talk about those things. And maybe it's not just the preacher that can talk about those things. Maybe it's not just the men that can talk about those things. You know, it's said that the men and the women prophesied. At Pentecost, it was the fulfillment of the prophecy back from Joel, where your young men and your maidens will prophesy. The daughters of Philip prophesied in the book of Acts. It was Priscilla and Aquila. You know, Priscilla sounds pretty girly to me. And her husband, Aquila. And she was his wife, and she was a woman. But you know what they together did? They got Apollos off by himself. They didn't do it in the church. But she got Apollos off by himself, and she taught him the things of God more perfectly. That's what she did. That's what she did. You know who the first ones were to proclaim the risen Lord? They knew something couldn't be known naturally. And who was that group? It was the women that he sent to tell the men that he's resurrected. The angels sent the women. And then Jesus sent the women. And it was by the command of the angels and Jesus that they would proclaim a risen Savior. Was that wrong? You think it was? Take it up with Jesus. He's the one that said it. So you see, I don't want to spend my time on these 7 gifts, but I'm trying to tell you that the gifts could be yours, any one of them. So we spend an extra amount of time on that gift of prophecy to try to show you that's not just the preacher. And then the next of those gifts was ministry, the gift of ministry. And you think, well, that's the minister, and it should be. But the word, you trace that word ministry, and it's to be a servant. It's to be a servant, to serve others, to help someone in need, to be a friend to someone who needs a friend. Well, they overlap a little bit, don't they? The gift of prophecy, the gift of ministry, the gift of exhortation. Well, that's the friend one, isn't it? Well, it is. Exhortation doesn't mean you jump on somebody. That's the way we kind of, if you exhort them, well, really, you look that word up and study it, and it's to be an encourager. The gift of being an encourager, to be a friend to somebody who's lonely, to pick somebody up who's down. Do we have down folks in this world? Do we have friendless people who need a friend? What if that friend that needed a friend, what if he was a stranger and you didn't know him, but he looked kind of lonely? Some people have an eye for those folks. And they just pick up on their feelings. And that's the gift of being an encourager, the gift of exhortation. And the gifts go on through. The gift of teaching, I think that was the third one. I stuck in exhortation too quick, didn't I? The gift of teaching. You should have corrected me, brother. And that's in the home with the children, and that's at the church. And that's teaching by example and teaching by words. And then came exhortation. And then came the gift. I should have studied this a little better, shouldn't I? Instead of trying to preach off the cuff as I am. I should have gone back and read this. But anyway, they're all in there. The gift of exhortation, and then the gift of exhortation. I'm sorry. Romans chapter 12, verses 6 through 8. The gift of ministry, the gift of teaching, the gift of exhortation, the gift of giving. Well, no wonder I forgot that one. That's what the preacher's not supposed to talk about, isn't it? Some people get excited about giving. I watched a deacon in the Philippines. His name was Wiley Puckett. He became a dear friend to me in 2 weeks. And he was in the Philippines, and he had cashed out his American dollars into Filipino dollars. And he was giving children 500 Filipino dollars. And he'd see another child, and he'd give them 500. That was equivalent at the time to about 200 American dollars. And Gus Harder, thinking he was going to protect Wiley, he said, Wiley, you can't do that. You know what Wiley said? He said, Gus, it's mine. I can do it if I want to. He was a rich man. By our standards, he was a rich man. But he had a gift for giving. When we got back to America and parted ways at the Atlanta airport, he's a great big old man. He grabbed me and gave me a bear hug, and it kind of hurt. He squeezed so hard, but it felt real good. He squeezed so hard. And he put me back at arm's length, and he said, if you ever need me, call me. It was a good feeling to have a rich friend in Georgia, though I never had to call him, thank the Lord. But if I'd have called him, he'd have been tickled to hear from me and give me a few dollars here and there. He had a gift of giving. I said I wasn't going to get caught up in these. I shouldn't have gone and looked them up. The gift of giving. The gift of ruling is the next one. That's not the boss. That's I think we could show you again by a word study. It's to lead in the practice of good works. It's to lead in the practice of good works. And a little child can lead. And sometimes it's the old man who dropped his stone first and walked away. So it's not who's the oldest or who's the youngest. It's just who's doing right and others following. And some people have a knack for others following in good works. And that's the gift of giving. And finally, that last one, the gift of showing mercy. The gift of showing mercy. I've got a good illustration for that one, but that's not my sermon for tonight. Anyway, back to our idea that not only has God given you his character, God has equipped you with special gifts in order to serve him through serving others. You notice each one of those gifts, there wasn't one to be used on me, for me to use on me. It's always equipping me to use those gifts for somebody else. And as much as you've done it to one of the least of these, my little ones, you've done it unto me. So if Jesus is not here and it's just a stranger, but if it's one of his, then if you do it to that little one of his or that big one of his or that fat one or skinny one, it doesn't matter their size. It's just the idea that you could do something for them to help them. And you chose to do that for them. The idea that an empty life could have meaning and purpose. The idea that we sometimes wonder, Lord, why am I here? I'm not worth anything. I'm not saying you're not. I'm saying the way I think sometimes. I got up one morning this week, and I shouldn't have said this to my wife, because it's not a husband's place to discourage his wife. And she said, what's wrong with you this morning? And I answered her, my whole life has been a failure. I've never accomplished anything. I was empty. And I was hurting. And I felt to not be worth much of anything for anything. And I had all these years to do something worthwhile, and I'd failed thus far. And my time's running out. And I think that way more often than you probably realize. I put on a pretty good false face some days. And some days my wife sees through the false face, and she said, what's wrong with you? And most days I'll say nothing, but that day I told her that. And I know it put a load on her she didn't need. I want her to tell me, but I don't want to tell her. Some way or another, that seems like the right way to be a husband to me, and maybe it's not. But I do talk to her pretty regular, because she's the one sounding board I've got, seems like. And I use that sounding board on occasion, and I did one morning this week. And from that point on, that day, it just picked up magnificently. And I called her about midday, and I said, I'm okay now. I'm okay now. I just was looking to have some purpose or some meaning or something like that. Is it not good in life to have a reason to live, a want to, a desire to get up tomorrow and keep going? We do have that. The Bible's given us that. Jesus gives us that. Here's your purpose for life. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. Which man is that? Which man is that? Who is that? Well, our subject tonight is strangers. You mean it's my job to go do something for somebody I don't even know? Well, that'd give me something to do better than feeling worthless, wouldn't it? I'd say it's a better option than that. Find somebody to help. There's plenty of them out there. There's lonely folks in nursing homes. We won't give you a list. You can find them. They'll just show up if you'll start praying. God will send them to you because they're praying to him for help. And if you're going to be the helper, then 2 and 2 makes 4 in math. And I think God's smart enough to put it all together, come up with the right conclusion too. So I think he'd open doors for us if we set in to ask him. If we really wanted to fulfill our purpose, if we wanted to use the gifts we'd been given to his glory, if that was what we were looking for with strangers, it might be him. Just keep thinking it might be him. Keep thinking it might be him. There was a priest and a Levite, and they passed by on the other side. You know who that was? In my terms today, that was the preacher and the deacon. They didn't say that. That's what I think of when I try to take that passage personally. And the preacher, he's got to get his mind on preaching and be about the Lord's business. You know how that works. And so he doesn't have time for that guy that was in the ditch. That guy that was in the ditch, laid in the ditch while the preacher and the deacon, the priest and the Levite passed by. And then along comes a good-for-nothing Samaritan. Well, they were lousy. Everybody knew they were. And he probably figured he was too. He'd been told that so many times. But who stopped? He stopped. Whose story do we still tell today? Whose name do we use on our laws that protect people that try to help those in need? What do we call those? We call those Good Samaritan laws. One man, one day, made a choice, and he's got laws named after him today. And anybody can mention the Good Samaritan, and everybody knows him. You know what he did? He made the history books. He came into our culture halfway around the world 2,000 years later. And you mention him and you know him. Everybody knows him. Folks know him better than they do a lot of other Bible characters. What happened there? How'd that happen? He made a choice. One day, he made a choice to entertain a stranger. And he did. And we still talk about him. In a sense, he's changed the world, hasn't he? One insignificant nobody. By his name, Samaritan, you knew he was a nobody. They all were. You just group them into that nobody list. But he made a difference by making a choice. Do the choices we make differences? Let me give you a few. There was a man named Peter. He had a fishing boat. There was a man named Jesus. He needed a pulpit. He comes to Peter in Luke chapter 5 and says, "Could I borrow your boat? I need a place to stand so the people can see me so I can preach to them." Peter said, "Sure, borrow my boat." This isn't King James, but it's based on King James. "Sure, you can use it." You know what happened right there? Peter made a choice to loan Jesus a boat. You know what would happen a few minutes later when the sermon's over? Peter loaned Jesus his boat, and when the sermon was over, Peter loaned Jesus his life. Wow, that was bigger than the boat, wasn't it? Did both experiences work out well? Well, we still talk about Peter too, don't we? And we still talk about Jesus, and one man one day made a choice to loan a stranger. Well, they weren't strangers by then, but they didn't know each other very well. I don't know if I can trust you with my boat. You know, you don't know much about boats. You're not a fisherman. What if you get in there and... he didn't say all that. He just made a choice to let this man use his boat. And then he made a choice to let this man use his life. And he used it well. And Peter, when Jesus first met Peter, he named him Rock. And from there was the making of a man rock. And by the time it was over, Peter became that rock. That's a great sermon too. Maybe I should have preached that one. The making of a man rock. But it all began when Peter made a choice to follow. Well, no, really it all began when Jesus came into Peter's heart and put those gifts in there and that fruit in there and all that stuff. But then Peter followed that side of him and not the other side of him. And he made a choice to follow Jesus. Who else made choices? There was a young lady a long, long time ago, and her name was Rebecca. I guess it would have just been a routine day for Rebecca, except something was working that she had no idea what was going on. You see, Abraham had sent his most faithful servant to find Abraham's son, Isaac, a wife. And that was the mission. And this Abraham's servant man was going all the way back to where Abraham had come from, back Ur of the Chaldees and all that place that Abraham couldn't go back to, and Isaac wouldn't go back there. He said, "No, don't take him over there. You just go over there and get a wife, bring back to him from over there." And this man's going over there, and he has no idea which one is the right one. And he sort of sets up a little thing with God. He kind of prays to God something like this. Now, when I get there and I've got these camels, and when I get to a well, then let it be sort of like this, Lord, and let it be that the first when a woman comes out there, a maiden comes, and if I ask her, "Could I have a drink of water?" and then she's going to answer me, "Yeah, I'll give you a drink and I'll water all your camels," let that be the one. Well, that's a pretty far-fetched idea. But before he got through speaking, he's at the well, and there's the girl, Rebecca. And he said, "I'm thirsty. Could you give me a drink?" She said, "Sure." He's a stranger. He's a stranger. But she made a choice. "Yeah, I'll give you a drink." And he's standing there sort of wondering, I believe that's what he's saying. I'm adding a little bit to this story, but it's based on truth anyway. And she says, "Oh, yeah, could I water your camels?" That was a lot to offer, wasn't it? I bet a camel coming across the wilderness was pretty thirsty. I bet they can drink a whole lot. I'm not basing this on biology, but I'm just wondering if that hump holds water. That's how they can go so long in the desert. That don't believe that. Anyway, I've got a feeling a camel could hold a whole lot, and he had several of them, and she watered them all. And what came of that? She made a choice. She's in the lineage of Jesus. She'll be his great, 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 who knows how many greats grandma. And along comes Leah in the next generation. And Jacob goes and he works 7 years for Rachel. And he gets double crossed by his future father-in-law. And on the wedding night, it's Leah and not Rachel that he ends up married to. And they didn't have night lights, and he doesn't discover the situation until the next morning. And you know what it says in God's word the next morning? He says, and it was Leah. It was Leah. When he discovered what had been done, and it wasn't Rachel, it was Leah that was in the tent with him. That's what it says. It was Leah. That's a good start to a marriage, isn't it? It. You know what Leah did? She stuck with him. And I think she probably had a lousy marriage. But from Leah came Judah and Jesus at the line of the tribe of Judah. She made a choice. She's in the lineage of Jesus, his great, 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 who knows how many greats, grandmother. And along comes Rahab, and she made a choice to hide 2 spies, and she's in the lineage. And along comes Ruth, and she made a choice to go with Naomi. Entreat me not to leave thee. And we still use that quote, and she's still quoted. Ruth is, because she made a choice to go with Naomi, and she's in the lineage of the coming Christ. You see, choices, we make them all day, every day. We make them moment by moment. We don't realize how many choices we might make in one day. Now, we don't choose to go to heaven. I think we've covered that one already this weekend. That's God's choice. But then once God works in me, I'm supposed to work out what he's working in. I want to use a non-Bible term, but I think there's an element of collaboration that comes in at that point. Or if I'm cooperating with God and listening to the voice of the Spirit and making the right choices, I can make a difference in the world that I live in. I might even be able to change the world. Some have with the choices they make. We have no idea. We kind of talk about these things that can, one thing lead to another thing and another thing and another thing. And you may not see what happens at the end of the line, and it may not be in your lifetime it happens. But one choice you make might make a difference way down the line, way far somewhere else. Or something you start to say or do or choose to do would cause a reaction that just caused something else and caused something else and caused something else, like the domino effect. I like the domino effect because I like to watch it happen. And I get my dominoes and I set them all up, and if you don't know what dominoes are, they're little brick tiles about that tall and about that wide, and they're kind of skinny that way, but you can stand them up. You stand one right here, and then you stand one right there, and then you stand one right there, and then you stand one right there, and then you stand one right there. But you're doing this on the floor, and you take off out through here, and you run it out there to that door, and you come around back there, and you go get another box and another box and another box, and the more of them you put out there, the more fun this is going to be. And what happens after you work this hard to get them all set up? You come back to that first one, and you just touch it and knock it over. And then what happens? It knocks the next one over, and it knocks the next one over, and it knocks the next one over, and you're running down through there trying to catch it. It comes all the way back around, and wow, that was so cool. And one move started it all. One thing started that whole thing. There's the ripple effect. What I'm trying to tell you is you don't know what happens with something you might do and it would cause something else to happen, something else to happen. You think God couldn't work this out? The ripple effect. You know what the ripple effect is? Here's the ripple effect. You fill up your bathtub just about that full, and then you take a quarter or a rock or something about that size, and you drop it right out there in the middle. And a ripple. And then another little wave. And then another little wave, and then another little wave. And about that time, the first one hits the side of the tub, and it starts backwards. And so now you got them coming this way and that way, and about that time, it hits the end of the tub, and they start backwards. And you got these ripples everywhere, and the whole thing's just turned into a raging sea. Well, not hardly that big. But you see, it started with one ripple, and look what happened. One little thing, and all those ripples. And the snowball effect. You know the snowball effect. You get some good wet snow, and you pack it all together right between your mittens there, and you lay it down, and you start rolling, you start rolling, you start rolling, you get your buddy to help you, and you keep rolling, and you get another buddy to help you because you need three to help now. And by the time you get through, you've got Frosty. And he's half as high as the house when you get through with him. Because of one little snowball that kept snowballing, and it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And my favorite one is the butterfly effect. None of this is in the Bible. But I like these kind of stories because they tell me the potential that one little thing could make a difference. One little movement could make a difference. The butterfly effect. This is really kind of a theory that some scientists have. I think scientists sometimes have too much time to think. But anyway, they come up with these kind of ideas that a butterfly flapping its wings in Nashville, Tennessee could start air motion. That could lead to further air motion, just to kind of like the ripples, but you can't see these ripples because they're in the air. And it gets bigger and bigger, and something else adds to it, and all of a sudden, you've got a typhoon. Well, it wasn't all of a sudden. It'd be a long time later that a typhoon in the South Pacific started because a butterfly flapped its wing in Nashville. Good grief, preacher, that can't happen. I'll agree with you, that probably doesn't happen. But some people think it does. Some smarter than me claim that. I don't know. But it still illustrates the point how something mighty little, just like a butterfly's wings, could cause something mighty big to eventually happen. Sometimes I don't trust God. Sometimes I get discouraged because I can't see what happened in the South Pacific because of some little movement I made here. Sometimes because I don't see the results, I think they didn't happen. I want to tell you that part's we leave to God. Our part is just to make the choice to entertain the stranger, to be the good Samaritan. You don't know who that'll touch and who it won't touch. You know it touches that fella in the ditch right there. You don't know who might have seen that. I was telling you all a crazy story this afternoon, but it was truth. Now that I made a mousy rat in the airport in the Philippines for a stranger, a little child. And I was just doing it mainly because our ride wasn't there, and I was kind of worried, and I thought, well, maybe I can make a mousy rat and get my mind off this. What am I going to do stranded in the South Pacific? But anyway, I make this mousy rat, and I give it to the child. And 2 days later, preacher had been watching that at the airport in a city. We're out in the middle of nowhere. And he comes and wants to know who we're with. We began to talk to him about what we believed, why we were there. We talked to him for a day or two. And at some point after a day or two, he wanted to be baptized and become a primitive Baptist. I didn't plan to include that in this sermon. And I'm not bragging on me. I made a mousy rat for a little child about 4 years old. Made him smile, and I thought that was the end of it. But you see, that wasn't the end of it that day. Maybe 9 out of 10 times that'd be the end of it. Or maybe none of the 10 times it would be the end of it. Maybe every time God takes it somewhere farther, and we just don't know it. Maybe we just keep on serving Him with the little things and quit looking for the big things. I wanted to be a top 10 preacher. I wanted to have a big church. I wanted to be famous, and I wanted to be successful. And God just keeps opening up little windows for me. And I do this or that. And some mornings I don't see the results and I get kind of discouraged, but I shouldn't do that. That's a lack of faith. That's not willing to play the system like God says to play the system. Just keep on flapping your butterfly wings and keep on pushing the domino over. And you don't know what's going to happen somewhere else when you do that. And keep on making choices to be like Christ. To be like Christ. To do what comes next that you can do in His name. As if He were right there beside you. Or one better, as if it was Him and you didn't realize it was Him. You wouldn't leave Him in a ditch, would you? No, Lord, I wouldn't do that to you. Well, if you leave one of His little ones in a ditch, maybe you've left Him there, the way He looks at things. My goodness, it's bigger than I am. But I think that's the way it's supposed to be. If I could see the results, I'd be a whole lot prouder than I am about me. And I have to fight that pretty routine. If I don't see the results, just trust God that something will happen, worth happening. But I do have a meaning and purpose in life. And it's just to keep on serving Him through serving others. Then I'll make a choice all through the day as to which way I'll go. As to whether I'll consider this as Him standing here or whether I'll remember it's Him standing beside me, at least in spirit, and He's watching what I do. And I don't earn heaven by making those choices, but I give Him glory by making those choices. And if that's my mindset, that my choices can change the world through His powerful chain reactions that could occur. And I don't know when He's going to do that and when He's not going to do that, but I just keep on doing what I'm supposed to do and trusting Him to do the detail work. I just do my little thing, my one little thing for this moment, and my one little thing for the next moment. And before it's over, I've gotten old and I'm about to die because I'm so old. But some of y'all aren't that old yet. Start out now. You got plenty of time left compared to me. I'll make a few more choices, and I hope and pray I'll make the right ones, but you've got plenty of time to make a lot of right ones. As you grow up and grow older, make the choice as if He was the one you were doing it for. Make the choice as if He's that stranger. Don't look down on people. Don't treat folks like they're nobodies. Don't be like the priest and the Levite. Be the Good Samaritan. And who knows? 2,000 years from now, they might be talking about you. You'll never know that. But who knows? He didn't know it either. I've enjoyed our time together. I appreciate your good attention. Jesus said, through His example, that we ought to follow the choice He made and be baptized. And if that's been kind of bothering you as to what you ought to do, then make the right choice. That's one choice you'd make. That's a big one. They're not all that big. But just if that's not time tonight to think about it, you think about it and see if that might be a choice you ought to make. And I'm not trying to win souls. I'm just trying to get us thinking on His wavelength and making the choices He'd have us make in every situation. God bless you. I love you.